Okay, now we are going to start talking about pain theory and how pain is controlled. This is where the rubber hits the road in physical therapy. This is where we start to see about all those modalities that we learned about in last quarter. This is where it happens. This is cool stuff here. So I hope you all are as excited as I am. Woohoo! Okay, so how is pain controlled? So we're going to use an example of hitting your thumb with a hammer. Yikes! You have the withdrawal reflex where you pull your thumb back. You yell. That's your limbic contribution, your emotional contribution. You might even use a few key phrases. You're going to apply pressure to that injured thumb. That's your natural reaction to do this. So the first scientific explanation of how this works was the gate theory, and it was proposed by these two guys. I don't know, one of them might be a woman, I would hope so, but anyway, Melzack and Wall in 1965. So the idea was that since first order sensory afferents, that's first neuron in the 3-neuron chain, they are converging on the same second order neuron as the nociceptive afferents. Then if the mechanical sensory afferents are more active by applying pressure to your thumb, the nociceptive information is inhibited. I call it the mom with two kids theory. The mom has two kids, they're both yelling, and she listens to the one who is yelling the loudest. So there's this weird, funny little 2-minute animation about gate theory. And it just explains it in a nice, really simple way. I really like it. There's also the same producers produced this little video about if you do Zumba or CrossFit. It was two little people talking about comparing Zumba and CrossFit, and it was really funny. But that's a total aside. So in gate theory, or the mom with two kids theory, the transmission of pain is blocked at the dorsal horn, closing the gate to pain so it doesn't ever get up to the brain. Okay? So later investigations have revealed more, but gate theory was important because it opened the doors to lines of inquiry into the mechanics and the control of pain. So TENS is the clinical application of some of those subsequent investigations. So as you all know by now, TENS uses electrical current applied to the skin to interfere with the transmission of pain information, and IFC is the alternating current version of that. So it's that pain control E-stim application that Brenda talked to you about. So a lot of the treatments and modalities that we use in physical therapy are based on these pain theories, and that it's the explanation of why they work. It's the neural explanation of why they work. So it's really nice to know that the stuff we're doing has an actual physical neural effect that can help people with their pain, which is kind of neat. So some of the details of the gate theory are not quite correct, but the original theory was important because it took us to the next level, which is the counter-irritant theory. So this is what is considered to be the current thinking, the sort of the modern version of the gate theory. It incorporates findings from that research that resulted from gate theory, and it explains the inhibition of nociceptive signals by stimulation of non-nociceptive receptors in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. Okay, so we're going to talk about the dorsal horn processing of nociceptive information. So we know that the dorsal horn is where the cell bodies, well, the cell bodies are also in the dorsal root ganglion of the sensory neurons, but then they synapse with the second order neurons in the dorsal horn. Okay, so the processing of somatosensory information that's coming in through those first order sensory neurons in the dorsal horn can be altered by abnormal activity or by tissue injury. So how it's processed can be altered by other stuff that's going on. So there are 4 states of dorsal horn processing: normal, we like those; suppressed, sensitized, or reorganized. So we started talking about that in the last lecture, or the last part, when we were talking about pain matrix. So we'll segue into anti-nociceptive systems in that light. So there's a little picture in the book that I like talking about the counter-irritant theory. So we have the mechanoreceptor, the A beta, that is coming into the dorsal horn. We have the tissue damage receptor, the C fiber, that's also coming into the dorsal horn. The C fiber is synapsing with a spinal interneuron or a second order neuron in the spinothalamic tract. The A beta fiber is synapsing with an interneuron that releases enkephalin, which is an endogenous protein that it's a neuromodulator that's going to inhibit the synapse. It's that presynaptic inhibition of that C fiber. So we're trying to keep that pain signal from being transmitted up the spinothalamic tract. So the enkephalin binding inhibits the transmission of that nociceptive message, and it inhibits those messages from the tissue damage detectors, the C fibers, from going up the spinothalamic tract, so it never gets to the brain. You never get a chance to interpret that as pain. Okay, that's the counter-irritant theory. That's the E-stim that we do. Soft tissue mobilization can affect that a little bit because you're stimulating mechanoreceptors. Aquatic therapy, because the water is circulating around and it's stimulating those sensory receptors. So there are a lot of different treatments that we do that use this counter-irritant theory to help reduce pain. We have a warm therapeutic pool that's 95 degrees at the clinic where I work, and when we have people with pain syndromes like fibromyalgia or polymyalgia rheumatica, that's an autoimmune disorder that affects all your muscles, and people they have a lot of trouble with pain control. We get them in that warm water, and it makes a huge difference for them. So it's counter-irritant theory. This is the level of anti-nociception that we're getting. We're stopping the pain signals from ever getting up to the brain. Okay, so we're going to talk about the 5-level model of anti-nociception. So anti-nociception, again, is the suppression of the pain response to stimulation that would normally be painful. Okay, so we have endogenous substances in our body, that is, they're naturally occurring, that activate anti-nociceptive mechanisms. They're called endorphins. We've all heard of endorphins, you know, in response to like runner's high and that kind of thing. We have those endogenous endorphins that activate those anti-nociceptive mechanisms. There are lots of different endorphins, but they include enkephalins, which we just talked about in a presynaptic inhibition scenario, dynorphin, beta endorphin. The pain-blocking opiates bind to those same receptors as endorphins. So sometimes those endorphin receptors are called opiate receptors. So isn't it amazing that there is a plant in nature that creates a molecule that binds to the same receptors as our endogenous pain control systems? Very interesting. But it's sort of amazing that that happens, I think. So when we're going to talk about sites of anti-nociception. So we talked a little bit in Pain Matrix how anti-nociception can happen in a top-down fashion. In other words, the brain is suppressing the pain. We just talked about the counter-irritant theory, where it's happening in a bottom-up, where the pain is being suppressed at the spinal cord, so it's never even getting to the brain. So basically, we're going to talk about each of these 5 levels in detail, but pain can be suppressed or altered at any of these 5 locations. So it can be altered in the peripheral system, and that's the one we just talked about, and we'll talk about each one of these in detail. It can be, or actually we just talked about level 2, the dorsal horn. So it can be at the periphery, in the dorsal horn of the spinal column, in the fast-acting neuronal pathway from the brain stem. So we're actually getting into the brain at this point. In the hormonal system, in the pituitary and the adrenals, and that's where beta endorphins are created, or with descending cortical inhibition, and that's the stuff that is coming from the cerebral cortex. So it can be in the cortex, it can be in the brain stem, it can be in the dorsal horn, or it can be in the periphery. So pain can be altered at any of those locations. Okay, so level 1 of the 5-level model is the periphery. So the aspirin and ibuprofen and other non-narcotic analgesics, they function at level 1. So we have molecules called prostaglandins, which stimulate nociceptors. Aspirin and other non-narcotic analgesics they decrease the synthesis of prostaglandins, so it prevents nociceptor sensitization, and it reduces peripheral pain. So when something hurts and you take an Advil, we're working on the level 1 area of anti-nociception. Topical medications like Bengay, Icy Hot, and capsaicin, they desensitize those nociceptive fibers as well, and so they are working on the level 1. So this is focused pain control at the periphery. It does not have an effect at the dorsal horn. What it does, the idea is to prevent those neurons from firing in the first place. Okay, there's a little video on level 1 anti-nociception if you so choose to watch it. So that's level 1. We're going to talk about. Okay, and there are a lot of little diagrams in the book. Some of them are way more detailed than we want to know. And we're not going to talk about ProNociception quite yet. We're going to. Yep, that's where we're going to. Okay, so we're going to talk about, before we talk about ProNociception, we're going to talk about the different levels of anti-nociception. So level 2 is the one we just talked about with the counter-irritant theory and its earlier counterpart, the gate theory. It occurs at the dorsal horn, and it does it by local inhibitory neurons releasing enkephalin or dynorphin that causes presynaptic inhibition of the synapse between the nociceptor, the C fiber, and its second-order neuron. Okay, so it's inhibition of nociceptive pain signals using stimulation of non-painful receptors. Both signals travel to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. One of them, the non-painful receptor, is the A beta. It stimulates the interneuron that releases enkephalin, which binds with receptor sites in the pain system and inhibits the transmission of those pain signals. It's presynaptic inhibition. So that's the example of the hammered thumb. It's you stimulate the mechanoreceptors, which releases enkephalins, which bind with the pain receptors and inhibit transmission of the pain signals. So we put pressure on a thumb to stimulate those mechanoreceptors and block the pain at the spinal cord dorsal horn level. So there's this 1 minute and 45-second video, which is sort of an ad for BioFreeze. I mean, I love BioFreeze. I think it's the greatest thing ever. But it describes the counter-irritant theory, or the gate theory, pretty well. And menthol works at level 2, and it also works at level 1. So even though it's an ad for BioFreeze, it does a really good job, and it's short, does a really good job describing the counter-irritant theory. But the whole idea is you get co-stimulation of the A beta and the C fiber. The A beta causes the interneuron to release enkephalin, which binds with the receptor sites in the pain system and uses presynaptic inhibition to inhibit the transmission of those pain signals. It stops it at the dorsal horn. It never gets higher than that. Okay, so those are the two what we consider to be ascending systems. In other words, it stays at the periphery or in the spinal cord, and it does not ascend. It stops it from ascending to the brain. Okay, stops the pain from ascending to the brain. Level 3 is a fast-acting neuronal descending system from the brainstem. So there's a part of the medulla that's called the Raphe nuclei. And whenever we're talking about nuclei, we're talking about a collection of cell bodies, neuron cell bodies that have a common function. Okay, so there are a lot of nuclei in the brain. There are groups of neurons that have a common function. So there's this one in the medulla, or a group of them, that project axons to the spinal cord. They release serotonin to interfere with the pain message. So there's the periaqueductal gray area, the PAG, in the midbrain, which activates those nuclei to release the serotonin. Okay, there is a small area in the pons, which is called the locus ceruleus. It inhibits spinothalamic activity in the dorsal horn by binding norepinephrine on the primary afferent to suppress substance P. And remember, substance P, when we're talking about neurotransmitters, it's a neurotransmitter and neuromodulator that functions in those pain pathways. So we're trying to suppress that to keep pain from being. So remember, the spinothalamic pathway goes from your spine to your thalamus. It's a conscious relay pathway. It is fast pain. So the locus ceruleus is releasing norepinephrine to suppress that fast pain. It inhibits that spinothalamic activity. So we're trying to reduce our conscious awareness of pain. Okay, so that's our pain reduction system. There's a little video on the neuronal descending system. So the next level is the hormonal system. So there's another area in the there's an area in the hypothalamus that's called the periventricular gray area, the PVG, and it is involved in this hormonal system. It stimulates the pituitary gland to release beta endorphins, and the adrenal medulla also releases beta endorphins. Low-frequency TENS and acupuncture may act on this level. It hasn't been conclusively proven, but when you use that TENS setting that's 1 to 10 hertz, it's that low-level, low-frequency TENS, they think that that may act by stimulating the periventricular gray area in the hypothalamus, which in turn stimulates the pituitary gland to release those beta endorphins. The beta endorphins, they bind to those endorphin receptors, those opiate receptors, and that's how it controls the pain. Again, that's not really proven, but that's the theory at this point about the TENS and the acupuncture, low frequency TENS. So the fifth level is the cortical system. That's from our cerebral cortex. This is the expectation, excitement, distraction, or placebo. They can all play a role in adjusting the transmission of nociceptive signals. So the cortical influence is what controls it. So the placebo effect activates the same higher order cognitive and brainstem areas activated by opiate drugs. Well, gosh, what's better for you, the placebo or opiate drugs? You know, obviously the placebo has fewer side effects. So the cerebral cortex, it can activate level 4, the hormonal system, which then in turn acts on the dorsal horn by releasing those beta endorphins. It can also activate the neural descending system. So something like hypnotherapy can affect this system. You can use your brain to stop your pain. So it's amazing. So it's also the opposite, the stress-induced indalgia, where stress triggers pain inhibition systems. So that's sort of the thing, like where the mom lifts the car off the baby, that sort of thing. They're stressed, and it allows them to ignore their pain and do something that they wouldn't normally be able to do. Or the thing, the guy who cut off his own arm when he was trapped between boulders, that is not something that we would normally be able to do. It would be too painful and we would stop. But his stress at potentially being trapped out there and dying was able to probably trigger his pain inhibition systems that allowed him to cut off his own arm with the little pocket knife or whatever that he used to do that. So our brain can have a really powerful, stimulates activation of the neuronal descending system and the hormonal pain systems, and it causes the pituitary gland to release those endorphins, and it's amazing what we can do. And in the same way, accidents and disasters, but also athletic competition. A lot of high-level athletes, they're pushing themselves beyond pain, but their high level of endorphin release and pain inhibiting systems can help them work through that pain. So those are all anti-nociceptive systems. The ProNociception is the opposite. It's sensitizing pain transmission. It's making the pain worse. So edema and endogenous chemicals can sensitize free nerve endings in the periphery, and they can cause the pain to be worse. If someone is anxious or depressed, it can cause their pain to be worse. Pro-nociceptive pain matrix activity can produce pain in the absence of nociceptive input. So your pain matrix is hypersensitive, as in fibromyalgia. This is often the case. And so there's no nociceptive input, but you still have pain. So there was a study that they talk about in the book where they have social exclusion, where the person was isolated from other people, and their brain activity changes during physical pain, and it can be the same during social distress. So there are a lot of psychological and emotional things that can cause pro-nociception, can cause our pain to increase and our pain transmission systems to be sensitized. So there's a chart in the book, and I don't know how well it shows up here, but it kind of and I really don't expect you to memorize this or know this, but just to kind of see the different areas of the brain that have all these different actions. So in the orange are pro-nociceptive, and the purple are they can be both pro and anti, and yellow are only anti. So there's some areas of our brain that can either of the cortex, when you just look at that first section of the cerebral cortex, there are some areas that could do both, like the dorsal and ventral prefrontal cortex. That can either make our pain worse or make our pain better. And the anterior cingulate cortex can make our pain worse or make our pain better. The insular cortex is a anti-nociceptive, or the orange is the insular cortex. It's a pro-nociceptive, so that can make our pain worse. And so, like I said, I don't expect you to remember this, or it won't be on the test or anything, but it's just interesting to see how the different areas can increase or decrease pain, and some of them both, depending on what the input is. So it's amazing stuff that our brain is doing. It's just absolutely amazing. So it's that idea of ProNociception. It's biological amplification of nociception. So the pain transmission is being intensified by the edema or the endogenous chemicals. And the fact that it can happen when you're anxious or depressed. I've worked with several people with fibromyalgia, and they're telling you about their life and everything, and they've got so much stress in their life, and think that I was working with this one woman, and she was telling me all this stuff, and I was thinking, holy crap, if I had all that stuff going on in my life, I'd be in pain too. So that anxiety and depression can have a huge effect on your pain level, absolutely huge. And so we can't discount that as a cause for pain. It can be a really big deal in people's lives, and a lot of patients come to us with chronic pain, and they have chronic other things going on in their lives too. So we're going to talk a little bit about chronic pain versus acute pain, and then that's going to segue into chapter 8, where we talk about neuropathic chronic pain and pain matrix dysfunction. So there's this little chart, table 7.4 in the book, which it compares acute pain to chronic pain. So under causes, acute pain is the threat of tissue damage or actual tissue damage. So that's, you have your injury, there it is. With chronic pain, it can be continuing tissue damage from a previous injury, environmental factors, sensitization of nociceptive pathways, or dysfunction of our endogenous pain control system. So a lot of things can cause chronic pain. Client reporting on acute pain, they usually have a clear description of location, pattern, quality, frequency, and duration of pain. They know when it started, they know when it stops, they know exactly, they can give you a very clear description of what's going on. With chronic pain, it's often a vague description. It's diffuse. It's in many areas in their body. They don't know exactly when it started. They don't know what helps it and what doesn't. So the function of acute pain is often a warning of tissue damage, or it's it's enforcing rest of healing tissue. So you limp to stay off that leg so that tissue can heal. So with chronic pain, if tissue damage is not continuing, there's really no biological benefit. So the biological benefit of acute pain is that it warns you of tissue damage, or it makes you rest healing tissue. With chronic pain, there's no biological benefit, because if you don't have any more tissue damage, you don't need to rest it. But there may be a social or a psychological benefit. And there are some days when I'm working with chronic pain people that I feel more like a psychiatrist than a PTA. So there might be some social or psychological benefit to pain continuing with chronic pain. So the consequences of acute pain: excessive autonomic activity, excessive endoneurocrine activation, and if it's not adequately treated, it can be as harmful as a disease, and we'll talk about the pain as disease theory, and it may progress to chronic pain. So if you have acute pain that's not adequately treated, it can actually progress to chronic pain. Now, chronic pain, on the other hand, has huge consequences. It can have severe financial, emotional, physical, or social stresses on the person and their family. And there are physiological consequences of inactivity too. So you can actually cause other problems because you're inactive because of your chronic pain. So chronic pain is a huge issue, and we deal with it a lot in physical therapy, and we will talk more about it in chapter 8. So we are going to distinguish between two different types of chronic pain. The type we're going to talk about right now is nociceptive chronic pain. So nociceptive chronic pain is chronic pain which is due to continuing stimulation of nociceptive receptors. So we have nociceptive input. Like the example given is that chronic pain resulting from a tumor that's pressing on nociceptors. Okay, so that is something, you're getting nociceptive input and you have chronic pain. The tumor is the cause of it. the nociceptors are being stimulated. The neurons are functioning normally. Chemical changes in the damaged tissue wake up some of those sleeping nociceptors, and so you just have a lot of pain because you're constantly getting that chemical input. Okay, we're going to talk about like different descriptions of pain. Primary hyperalgesia. So algesia is based on the Greek root algia, which is pain. Hyper is higher, like hypo is lower, hyper is higher. So primary hyperalgesia refers to excessive sensitivity to neural stimuli that are going on in the uninjured tissue. So the example is the pain resulting from mild heat on burned skin. If a fingertip is burned, picking up a hot plate is more painful than if the skin weren't injured. Another good example of that I think a lot of us have experienced is if you've ever had a sunburn. Your sunburn's getting a little bit better, but it still kind of hurts. And you get in what you think is just a warm shower, but oh my gosh, it feels a lot hotter than warm. It's more sensitive, it's more painful than if your skin weren't injured by that sunburn. So you're hyperalgesia, you're hyperstimulated, you have a heightened response to pain. Nociceptive chronic pain serves a useful biological function as a warning to protect the injured tissue. So in the sunburn example, it's reminding you that yeah, your skin's still burned. You probably want to take a cool shower and not a warm shower. So it serves that useful biological function of protecting your injured tissue. It's a warning. Okay. Neuropathic chronic pain, on the other hand, is another story, and we will talk about that in Chapter 8. So we're going to, one of our assignments this time, in this module, we're going to be talking about pain in the clinic and how the things that we do affect pain, how the treatments that we provide affect pain, and it's just kind of a nice way to ground it clinically. We have all this very theoretical information. I like to try to ground it clinically so you know why we care about this stuff. Okay, I'm going to wrap this one up, and our next lecture will be in Chapter 8, where we will be talking about the other type of chronic pain, which is the neuropathic chronic pain.